So just a little overview of what we're going to do. I just gave you a little welcome. I'm going to introduce you to Mike Shepsky here in a second. I'll say a few words about some of our new board members, and then we'll have a bit of a year in review. I'm sorry that we have to go back to 2020 for a little while, but it's certainly worth it. Give a few thank yous, and then I'm going to hand it over to Stephen and Andrea for Silviculture Revisited, measuring trees in bushel baskets, not board feet. So, as you know, PVCA has been busy for a while looking for an executive director, and it is an absolute joy to be able to introduce you tonight to Mike Shepsky. Right from the beginning in our interview, he was incredibly personable. He came with a background of really excellent service in nonprofit and in business as well. You'll see that he is a friendly, focused, great communicator. Mike, why don't you say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. First of all, I'm really excited to meet all of you at some point, whether it's, a chat at the Inglebean or wherever I run into you. So please do say hi if you see me. I'm just spending my time this week meeting the board members and everyone. So I'm just really excited to meet everybody. So please do say hi. A little bit about me. I grew up in Northumberland, kind of to the east of Penns Valley at the confluence of the North Branch and West Branch of the Susquehanna. I loved my time in Scouts, Eagle Scout, and did a lot of hiking on the Mid-State Trail, actually. So pretty familiar with Bald Eagle State Forest. Went to Penn State for college. Afterwards, I went to Australia and worked there for 8 years in nonprofit leadership with a bunch of excited university students. So got to engage a lot of volunteers. More recently, I had a little bit of a marketing background at a company called New Pig in Tipton, PA. So hopefully we can get some good communications and reach of PVCA out there. Just in a couple of meetings that I have had, it's been really fun to see some of the big wins that PVCA has had in the rich history. Just some of the education stuff, and I'm not going to name them all, but Young Forest Initiative, the riparian buffers and the watershed, Muddy Paws. These are all things that are just amazing, and I think are going to be really easy to share with more people around the state of Pennsylvania who would be interested in helping us. So my hope is to bring everyone together, find some key leverage points within the organization, some efficiency, communication. If we got a lot of work to do, and when you're lifting a big boulder, we all know that if you lean down on the right leverage point, it gets a lot easier. So I'd like to help us do that, leverage things well. And yeah, through efficiency, like I mentioned, but also the culture, how we engage, talk to each other. And just like we have the balance we need balance in the environment, and that has to be right, and we pay attention to it. Or if you're farming and the soil has to have the balance, our culture as an organization needs that balance as well. And if we can achieve that, I think we'll see a lot of fruit. So I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, sure thing, Mike, and welcome aboard. And yeah, you're going to have a great time meeting some really great people and helping us advance PVCA.
Looking forward to it.
So, as you know, we also have some newer board members, and some of these faces are very familiar to some of you, and maybe some not so much. But I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our newer board members who joined us this past year. So Ethan Davis there in the top left, and his wife live in Woodward, PA. They are pretty new transplants there, where they own and operate Strong Roots Organic Farm, a small-scale farm that regenerates biodiversity, enhances ecosystem services, enriches the soil, and improves the watershed. I can say Ethan has this really cool idea right now for a possible map, and we'll see what we can do with it. Um, Erica Husser lives on Georges Valley, and I do believe that she is Pat's neighbor. She works in the Penn State College of Nursing, and she has coached and volunteered for Penns Valley Youth Soccer, served on the Gregg Township 2025 committee, and most recently served on the Penns Prairie at Tri-Municipal Park Board. She also recently gave a really incredible presentation at the university that we can make available to you. Mark Engel, as many of you know, is the owner of PC Medics and Company, and Mark is an insatiable, unstoppable super volunteer with the Boy Scouts of America, Penns Valley Youth Baseball, Basketball, and Football, East Penns Valley Community Business Association, Penns Valley Park and Rec, the Penns Valley Area School District, Basketball Boosters Club, and I do suppose that he does sleep sometimes when he's not volunteering or working. We love having Mark aboard. And finally, Liz Ebeling is an administrative officer in the Bureau of Fisheries. In 2020, she was appointed to the board of directors to fill a vacancy and then voted on in December. She is our treasurer. And let me say, it is very nice to have her on as the treasurer. She earned her MBA while working and caring for her two daughters, and in her current position at Fish and Boat, she manages payroll, taxes, and grant administration. So she brings some really good experience that helps us with our fiscal side of the house. So thank you to the new board members for joining us. It's great to have you. You make our culture better, smarter, and you're going to take us great places. So I'm sorry I have to talk about 2020. Everybody can maybe have a little tear and maybe a little yay, it's over, because we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm sure some of you are already vaccinated. I wanted to read to you an email that came out from PVCA on March 30th of last year. The COVID-19 virus cannot and should not be ignored. We all need to adhere to the call for social distancing and efforts to flatten the curve in order to confront the spread of this disease. Now, maybe more than ever, personal hygiene that includes hand washing and coughing, sneezing into the crease in your elbow is something everyone should be practicing. To keep these businesses afloat during this time of crisis, we are asking you to support them in any number of ways. Call and ask if purchases can be made over the phone for pickup or delivery. If the business has a website and sells their products or services via the web, make a purchase that can be picked up or delivered. Purchase a gift card or gift certificate that can be redeemed at a later date. Help support the employers and owners of these businesses by reaching out and inquiring what assistance they need during this time. This is a time when we need to look out for our friends and neighbors. Spread the word to help reach out and support our wonderful local businesses. Now, as you all know, some of you being in these businesses, many of you going to them on a daily or at least weekly basis, you know how important it was to maintain community this past year. And I want to give special thanks to all those businesses that support PVCA because they make it possible for us to do what it is that we do. And I want to thank every member of PVCA who did what needed to be done during an incredibly, incredibly difficult time. I don't think that we can understate how difficult some things about COVID-19 have been and continue to be. But I really look forward to us as an organization and all the people of the Valley rebounding and coming back even stronger. So I want to thank you very much for doing that. You know, 2020 might have slowed us down a little bit. I remember when we were going, what are we going to do? Are we going to be able to meet in person? But you all kept doing things. So we held the Planting for Healing Zoom webinar. And Andrea, I believe that you were involved with that, right? And so that, along with Sarah D. Pasquale, right, shared knowledge about herbs, love of nature, and commitment to promoting the health of both. Learning about the multifunctional riparian buffers like the one installed by PVCA on her farm. So they took people on a virtual tour of the newly planted buffer to learn how to utilize the many plants for medicinal preparations. Additionally, um, Jim Flanagan kept doing what Jim Flanagan does as our environmental educator, right? And trying to persist, make sure that kids and adults can be connected with the environment, learn about our home, learn about our water, our watershed. He did that in a number of ways, including creating this the Field Journal. He and Lexi and I, along with a community federal work study student, we had applied for a Department of Environmental Protection, Environmental Education grant, and that is actually coming to fruition now. They just presented on it at the Pennsylvania Association for Environmental Education conference earlier this week, and that's to incorporate climate change into meaningful watershed education and experiences, both in the Penns Valley School District and in State College. And they're partnered with a design class, a graphic design class at Penn State to make replicable, really high quality lesson plans and materials that can be disseminated pretty much anywhere where they would be site appropriate in North America. So kudos to them for that incredible work. Now, going into the fall, we still had river songs, and I saw a bunch of you there, and we got to drink good beer and eat good food and listen to great music. And it was great to see Kai Shaft and company get out and have a good time. So it was a little delayed, kind of got slowed down. But you know what? It was a great time. It was great to see some of you there, talk with you. And we got to, bring to a close some really important work for the governance of PVCA. So we adopted a new set of bylaws, which I can tell you Mike has read because he's asked me lots of questions about them and said there are the 6 points at the front. So Mike's already on it and knows what he's doing. And that was a really fantastic effort by a number of volunteers, and I want to thank them so much, the people on our governance committee, for doing that. Gives us the orders of operation that we have to do as an organization so that we can operate well, and gives us a chance to revisit our committees and formally incorporate them and take our next step as an organization. And then in the fall, PVCA partnered with the Nittany Valley Environmental Coalition to ask questions of people running for the State House and U.S. Congress, their views on the environment. And so people showed up to that, and that was a great service done there. There's just something else that's not on here that I wanted to add, is the partnership for the solar tour around central Pennsylvania that had some members of Penns Valley and some Penns Valley examples as well. That was really good to see. And then in December, we had a meeting on this crazy ultra warm climate changed kind of day over at Muddy Paws. And I want to give a really special thanks to Mary Kay Williams for her history of letting PVCA use Muddy Paws for a number of things. She's been very generous to us, and she helped our board this year develop some more strategic insight into our operations. And I just want to thank her very much for those services. They are indispensable. And of course, one of the things that PVCA, of course, is noted for is the incredible watershed work that we get to do with funding and partners from all over, including money from Growing Greener, the Natural Resources Conservation Service out of the Department of Agriculture, of course, local property owners with whom Lyle and Andrea and Tom and company partner. We have funding from the Annenberg Foundation, Coldwater Heritage Partnership, and then, of course, lots of in-kind donations. And when you add all that up, it's been over $200,000 of work in stream restoration at Muddy Creek, Sinking Creek, Potter Run, Elk Creek. We have wildlife habitat improvements over 3,000 seedlings planted at the Pine Creek Cemetery Road, 4,000 container plants planted at 3 projects in the 6-mile Elk Creek Headwaters Management Area, 14 acres planted at Elk Creek using 27 species of native tree and shrubs, and on and on. It is incredible the work that you all do, and that gives us the opportunity to bring people together so that they can learn about what makes our watershed work so that it works for us. When we work for it, it works for us. And I think that this organization knows that, and that the culture of the land and the culture of the people come together to do really remarkable things. So I want to thank you so much for all of that. So what's coming up? All right, May 11th and May 12th, we got Center Gives. Okay, last year we did so well with Center Gives, but we want to do even better this year. So I'm challenging every person here, right? Participate in Center Gives, and especially from 5 to 6 p.m. at the pop-up. You can come to the pop-up taproom takeover. We want you between 5 and 6 on May 11th to donate to Center Gives then, because if we do well enough, we can get some of that matching, we can get a matching prize, and that would be amazing. Plus, maybe have not that I would encourage people to overdrink or anything, but maybe have a beverage or two like earlier, because then the wallet might open up a little more. No, I jest. I jest. But no, we really appreciate all of your support for PVCA, and so participate in Center Gives so that we can raise even more. That would be wonderful. Of course, we're going to have a stream bank cleanup this year, and Annie has some notes about this. So I want to hand this over to Annie here for a second. Annie?
Thanks, Peter. So we're doing the stream bank cleanup just a little bit differently this year because we want to maintain social distance. So we're having people register through Eventbrite. And then in the confirmation email, you go to a doodle poll and sign up for what time you want to come to the park to pick up your gloves and vest and sign the waiver and get your location. So it's still going to be a similar event, but there'll be no potluck, and you'll just bring back your trash whenever during the day, whenever you finish up. And that is Saturday of Earth Day weekend, so Saturday, April 24th. Hope to see lots of people there.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to note here that something very special about that watershed, with the watershed, that the grant by the Coldwater Heritage Partnership to restore 600 feet of Muddy Creek was matched by Annenberg Foundation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Seven Willows LLC. So we want to thank them very, very much. And thank you, Lyle, for making sure that I stated that explicitly. Lyle is the exacto. So we also hope that you'll come to River Songs. That's a little further out. We have that July 17th from 3 to 7 outdoors, and we'll have great music, great local food, beer and spirits, et cetera, et cetera. Come out, support us then, have a good time. So, of course, the businesses that support us, that I began this presentation by talking about how we could support business during the opening of COVID. And I want to thank all of the businesses that support us. You help make PVCA a wonderful organization, and we consider you a part of our organization. Thank you for being a part of it. And of course, every person who is here with us tonight, all of our members, thank you for being a member. Tell more people about PVCA, invite them to our events, invite them to become members as well, because membership helps us do the work that we need to do. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen here in just a minute, but we're going to have 2 really great presentations, and Annie will be doing the question and answer moderation. So when you have questions for them, you can type them into the Q&A, and Annie will take those. So first, Stephen Hoy is going to speak with you from the American Chestnut Foundation, a graduate of the Mont Alto campus, the original Pennsylvania School of Forestry. He will get us going. So thank you very much. And Stephen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Everybody hear me okay, hopefully? Got nods, great. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everyone's seeing an opening slide for PowerPoint. All right. Well, thank you again. Stephen Hoy, I'm actually a Penns Valley native, grew up at the base of the Seven Mountains, went to Mont Alto, briefly transplanted out to Colorado, and then ended up back in the Valley. So glad to be home, official home. And tonight I'm gonna hopefully give a really kind of wave top view of the American Chestnut Foundation, what we're doing, and some things that hopefully you members and interested parties can help us out with over this coming season. So the American chestnut was once a very common tree, specifically within Pennsylvania, but across a wide range that went all the way up into Maine and all the way down into Georgia and Alabama, all the way west to Mississippi and the western portions of Tennessee. And it was so common that 1 in 4 trees would be an American chestnut. And in Pennsylvania, it was even more dense that the southeastern portion of the state, it could be 1 in 3 trees. There was an old saying that a squirrel could go from Tennessee to New York without ever touching the ground on chestnut trees. So it was really a prolific species and a really, really useful species as well. So it has kind of a name of the king of the eastern forest. Some folks would call it the redwood of the east. You could find mature trees that are 100+ feet tall and diameters of 15 or more feet. Typically, those were found in the southern part of the range. So we're looking at the Tennessee, Carolina region. Pennsylvania, I believe the largest documented was over 5 feet in diameter, and again, over 100 feet tall. The current record for pure American chestnut, still alive, growing today, is in Maine, and it's a tree that's over 121 feet tall. So while they are being impacted by a blight, which I'll get to in a minute, you can still go out in the woods and you can still find mature trees. So what was it used for? Most commonly, and something you can find in Penns Valley, is siding on barns and timber frames for older structures. Is extremely rot resistant wood. It's typically very straight grained, very easy to work with. It's light, it's strong, similar properties of oak, but a fraction of the weight. You could also get tannins out of the bark. So they would use the bark, they would strip it off the tree, extract the tannins, and use that for tanning leather. It was an excellent food source, which is an area that I'm specifically interested in, of growing chestnuts as a food crop and using that to benefit wildlife as well. So what happened? Early in 1904, in the Bronx Zoological Gardens, they discovered a pathogen that was affecting the chestnut trees and causing them to die off at a rather alarming rate. And in 1904 was when the blight, Cryphonectria parasitica, was first isolated at that location. And from there, it was on a rampage, traveling up to 50 miles a year and just destroying huge swaths of chestnut forest. It was first discovered in Pennsylvania in Montgomery County, so southeastern PA, in 1908, and very quickly moved throughout the entire state in the 19-teens, so 10 to 20 range. Pennsylvania was so concerned, we actually developed our own blight commission that acted independently from the federal actions that were taken to try to stop the chestnut blight. And this is really what you could find in the native range. Where there were pure American chestnut stands, they were completely decimated. Nothing left but these ghost forests is what some folks would call them. Just stands of dead, mature chestnut trees, and really nothing growing in the understory. If you look at that image on the left, there's no resprouts, there's no other vegetation, and you're starting from a blank slate, which also rings true for parts of Pennsylvania where early 1900s they were going through and slicking off large portions of the state for timber and charcoal and those industries. So we lost an estimated 3.5 billion trees out of 4 billion. So what is the chestnut blight? Some images here. On the left, you will see 2 true American chestnut stems, both being infected with rather severe cases of chestnut blight. The orange that you see is the canker. This is what forms after the blight gets into the cambium layer of the bark, and it essentially girdles the tree. So it cuts off that flow of nutrients. It feeds off of the dead and dying tissue, and then it produces these spores, which is what you see on the right. So the lower image is a close-up of the bark, and you have these little spores. And then this upper image is under a microscope where you can see these little sacs, and these are what are producing the spores of the blight. And these will push through to the surface and then eventually become airborne and move on to their next host. So this is what made it a very difficult virus to stop, where it was airborne. It would also survive on dead material. It would survive on associated species. So you could actually go out and find it on oaks, but it would not be as detrimental to oaks, and oak can typically easily wall off that infection and move on. So we lost 3.5 billion trees, but that still left a great number of trees that were alive and in various states of existence. With the American chestnut, we consider it to be functionally extinct. It's not truly extinct. As I mentioned earlier, you can still go out in the woods, you can find mature trees, you can find many trees in the understory, especially up toward the ridge tops, which is where they like to be, kind of higher and drier sites. But this is a map from 2010. This is a forest inventory and analysis map from the U.S. Forest Service. And it just shows the darker the colorations is a more dense concentration of chestnuts. So you can see central PA, we're in this region of 450 to 1,000 plus stems per square kilometer. We like to go back and forth between, miles, square feet, kilometers, just play both sides of that. But yeah, it's still a very common species to go out and find if you know what you're looking for. And this is what we're looking for. The easiest time to find an American chestnut is late June, early July. And that's because the trees are flowering. Also, a unique characteristic of chestnut is they tend to flower later than most tree species. So they're not as prone to the late frosts and freezes that we've had the last few years. You can go out and identify these from the air because they look just like they're covered in a light dusting of snow. My actual background photo shows our orchards here at Penn State in peak flower period. So all these male flowers that you can see are the same as what you'll see in that left-hand image of these male catkins. So this is what produces the pollen. And then has a very strong scent. Some people like it, some people really don't care for it. And they look kind of like a long pipe cleaner. And then the female flowers, they're pretty unremarkable at the beginning stage. They kind of look like a miniature pineapple and then develop into these large, kind of giant sea urchin looking balls, or a large tennis ball. And the nuts are actually contained within those. So the best time to find those burrs is late September, early October, whenever the trees are really maturing the nuts and getting ready to drop them, that's when it's easiest to pick those out. So what we have is a variety of species, depending on who you have a conversation with. There's between 4 and 7 species of chestnut, and that runs the range of the American chestnut, which for the nut photo in the top left is the far left nut, the smallest of the 4. And then it goes Chinese, proceeding to the right, European and Japanese are the largest. Same with the leaves down below, where you have your American on the far left, and then Chinese, European, Japanese moving to the right. And then the small leaf up top is the Allegheny chinkapin, which is a minority species and something that's not very common in central PA, more of the Mason-Dixon line area. But you can still occasionally find them in the right spot. Characteristics of the American chestnut, they have this long canoe-shaped leaf where you're getting a pretty defined taper at both ends. You have this serrated edge with a breaking ocean wave type serration on the leaf. They are thin, so as you can see in that upper leaf, you can kind of tell the light's moving through that. And they're hairless, so that applies to both the leaves and the twigs, where you're going to look at them, you won't find any pronounced hairs. The buds kind of angle away from the main stem, and they're more of a brown color compared to Chinese chestnut, which you can tell right away it has a thicker leaf, a very glossy top side. The underside is more of a frosted white color from all the hairs that are on the underside, and the buds are very different, as well as the twigs, where it's more of a P shape for the bud and it tends to stay closer to the stem, whereas the Americans were really angling away from that stem. So what we wanted to do with the Chestnut Foundation is combine the characteristics that we really enjoyed of the American, which is that height, that 80 to 100 feet of growth, the dominant tree in the canopy, straight trunks, few branches, ideal for timber quality. Combine that with the resistance component that you get from the Chinese and Japanese species. So our breeding program started out making crosses, taking Chinese pollen, applying them to American trees, and then slowly breeding the American characteristics back into that initial cross. Each time isolating for the trees that are still maintaining that higher level of blight resistance. Which brings us to how exactly are we developing these blight resistant, disease resistant American chestnuts? And we're using something we call the 3 burr strategy. So it's breeding, biocontrol, and biotechnology united for restoration. And what that means is we're taking our initial approach of breeding, which is just, as I said, taking an American tree, applying Chinese pollen, and slowly breeding through many generations. So we're actually on our 7th generation of trees that are mostly American, retaining that component of blight resistance from Chinese. And this is an image of our orchards here at Penn State. The trees on the left-hand side are younger, and you can see the pink dot. We call that the pink dot of death. So we've decided those trees do not have the blight resistance that we need, and theirs are going to be removed. And eventually they'll look like the right-hand portion of the image, where you have mature trees. These are infection cankers at the base of the trees. So we've inoculated them. And this is a tree actively walling off that infection site and preventing it from killing the tree. So it doesn't mean they're immune. You can look up at the stem of the tree and find cankers throughout the length of that stem, but all those are mostly superficial. They're not going to kill the tree. And that's what we're really aiming to capitalize on, those genetics. So as I mentioned, the selection, so we start out with 150 seedlings in a plot of 40 by 40 and whittle that down to ultimately 10 to 15 trees. So we're killing off 90% of the material that we have in hopes of retaining that 10% that are really the cream of the crop and have the characteristics we need. So biocontrol, the second B, is using a virus to actually infect the blight. So we're actually, it's loosely similar to giving the blight a cold. So it still exists, it doesn't kill it, but it really knocks the energy and virulence out of the infection and allows the tree more time to contain that site, wall it off, and continue to grow. And what you can see, the left-hand image is uninfected bark, so nice and clear. And then the right-hand image, so yes, it was infected. Again, weak infection, and the tree was able to create this callus tissue, which looks really funky, but ideally, or really is not going to impact the growth of that tree long term. And then the one that a lot of people are interested in right now, and it's gotten a lot of press, both good and bad. Know that folks have their own opinions on it, is the biotechnology side. And it's important to keep in mind that that's not CRISPR, that's not necessarily Monsanto. Those are technologies, but there are many other things in addition to that. Some things like sequencing. So taking the genome, extracting the DNA from leaf material, bud material, and trying to put that back together and solve the puzzle of, well, what does resistance really look like? Where are the genes that are responsible, and how do we capitalize on that information? So, and again, there must be genes that are related to the resistance, which is why you get such a large infection on an American stem and a minimal infection on a Chinese stem. And then the other side of biotechnology is inserting genes, altering genes, things of that nature. What the foundation has done is formed a partnership with Syracuse University in New York. They have been working on the biotech side of incorporating resistance into chestnut since the mid 1980s. And they've recently put in the paperwork for deregulation of a specific tree they're calling the Darling 58. And this tree has one added gene from a wheat plant, which is oxalic oxidase, the OXO. And they've paired that with a marker gene so that they can find it. And they're finding that this gene has the specific purpose of neutralizing the acid created by the blight. So not killing the blight, not trying to alter the blight, but neutralizing the effects that it can have on an American chestnut tree. And the results that they've had are very promising. They have trees that are showing even higher levels of resistance to chestnut blight than Chinese and Japanese species. So there are a lot of regulations and permitting associated with that. And again, this is mostly being done up in New York at Syracuse University. They have thousands of trees, very controlled settings where they're going out and bagging. The image on the left, you can see they actually have to put these hardware cloth screens over their flowers to prevent the escape of any of that pollen into the native environment. And that brings us to what can folks do? We are really a citizen scientist oriented organization. We rely on volunteers and members to do a bulk of this work. Here in PA, it is literally myself and one other full-time person and a part-time office staff. And then we rely on volunteers and one intern to do all of our planting, our inoculations, our harvesting operations, things like that. So if you're interested, feel free to contact me. We send out a notification for any events that we're doing. We're always happy to teach folks. If you'd be interested in giving a presentation, more than happy to set folks up with that. And then what I have a feeling that most folks are interested in with this group might be the planting. We offer seed and seedlings for folks that are members of our organization, as well as for specific projects. require some lead time, but we're willing to work with folks to get both Americans and the hybrids out because we want to test our material. We want to see, and I say hybrids, those are the conventional breeding hybrids, nothing transgenic, that's all tightly regulated. But we want to get it out there and get it tested in the field and see what it's like, real world applications. And then if folks are interested in hiking, we always want to know where new trees are. So if you come across an American chestnut or what you think is an American chestnut, you can go to patacf.org and we have a tree locator form. Fill out some data points for us and submit that with a leaf sample ideally, and we can write back to you and say, great, this is an American chestnut and we're going to use this in our germplasm conservation orchard. So we're going to try to collect some of that material and preserve the genetics. Or, hey, this is a Chinese chestnut. I would say if it's producing nuts, go and collect those and have yourself a delicious chestnut snack. Yeah. So that really wraps up the presentation. One last part is, so I've kind of spelled out the doom and gloom of the American chestnut. So why would I also say to plant them? Again, we want to preserve that germplasm. It's also early successional habitat. So the tree is going to die, but the root system stays intact and sends up new shoots. It's a very vigorous sprouting tree. So you'll get this kind of perpetual early forest situation, early successional situation of young stems. They'll grow to maybe 25 feet, they'll die back, it'll send up new sprouts. And when within that cycle, you'll get nuts sporadically throughout that cycle. There's an American orchard in northeastern PA or northwestern PA that's planted in the 1980s and still producing thousands and thousands of nuts every year. So it's still possible to get a decent harvest out of them for wildlife and for your own culinary needs. And at this time, if there are any questions, I can stop sharing my screen and go through what we have.
Okay, so first question from Lyle is, what was the source of the virus originally?
So we've narrowed it down to most likely Japanese chestnut stock that came in most likely through the port of New York for estates or some other purpose. Someone may have been trying to improve on the American chestnut and starting their own breeding program and just unintentionally brought it over with them. Even predating that 1904, it's most likely the 1800s.
Okay. Next question, are chestnut trees susceptible to deer?
Yes, indeed. Everyone and everything loves chestnut. So you will have significant deer issues or rodent issues. We end up putting 8-foot exclusion fence around all of our orchards just to try to mitigate that. On a small scale, using tree cages and tree tubes has been adequate to keep the deer away from them while they grow and get established.
Right. Tammy writes in a question, and I'm not familiar with this word. Are chestnuts resistant to juglone?
Juglone, yeah. There is conflicting data on that. You can find both online. Our guidance is that while they'll tolerate juglone, it can affect specifically smaller seedlings while they're getting established. But in general, walnut and chestnut don't occupy the same sites. So if you have walnut, that can be an indicator of a wetter site. And Andrea, feel free to chime in if you have alternate information. But if it's a wetter site, then chestnuts aren't going to be happy there. They really like a higher and drier site with well-drained, lighter soil, whereas you'll get walnuts in the lower the bottomlands typically.
Okay. Ryan wants to know, are there commercial chestnut orchards in Pennsylvania?
There is one. They're right around I-80, kind of eastern central PA. And as best we can tell, they've been in existence since the 80s, but they strictly do wholesale. Here locally in Penns Valley, I know that Scott Case I've worked with Scott, and he's been planting some Chinese chestnuts for eventual harvest and sale purposes. And we're hoping to get more Chinese chestnut production in the valley for sure.
Great. Hang on, the questions are flying in. Betsy wants to know how many years until an American chestnut produces nuts?
The typical range is 3 to 7 years, depending on the site. Full sun, you can expect to see flowering and nut production within, I would say, year 5 on average.
Mm.
So it's a bit unique for a nut tree in that respect, where oaks and hickory and pecan, you're waiting 10, 15, 25 years to get your first crop, whereas chestnut by year 10, they're really producing a fair amount of nuts.
I just want to ask a follow-up on that. Does every chestnut tree, are they all going to eventually get the blight?
So every chestnut tree will encounter blight to some degree. What typically seems to be the pattern is the trees do fine while they're adolescent and sapling. Once they get to the nut bearing age is what typically leads to wounding or an opportunity for the blight to infect the tree. It's a wound induced pathogen. So if the tree were to be completely healthy and no openings whatsoever in the bark, then there's no access point for the blight. The blight is here, it's here to stay. You could go out into the forest and you're probably going to be able to find some spores somewhere. But until it reaches that production phase, it doesn't have an access point. And then once the nuts start to produce, that tends to coincide with limb breakage or the nuts weigh down the branches and create an opening right at the branch union with the stem. And that's where you tend to see the initial infections.
I see. Okay. So Loanne had asked about the address for the reporting form for found trees. And if everybody wants to look in the chat, that is patacf.org. That's listed in the chat for people that need it. Nick is asking, the picture behind you is of chestnuts. What age, how tall, and was the picture taken from above?
So this is one of my tasks is I get to go out and do pollination work. So this is taken from about 50 feet in the air with a boom truck. And you can see a little bit behind my left shoulders, there's some bags on that tree. But these trees range about 30 to 45 feet 45 is our tallest tree. And they were planted 20 years ago this year. So the Arboretum really established their program in 2001.
Can we visit those trees behind you?
Absolutely. I can do tours. COVID has its own special set of circumstances, but if folks want to come and get a tour or just come out to the orchard, they are open to the public. It's in the Arboretum, but it's not the like garden portion of the Arboretum. It's kind of tucked back along 322, and it's a little difficult to get to, but again, if folks are interested, please just send me an email and we can figure out a way to get you out to see those trees.
Great, maybe we could have a little socially distant field trip. And John and Catherine are asking, what are the growing conditions best for planting? I know you mentioned it likes kind of high and dry. Is there anything else?
So they like an acidic soil. Think not quite as acidic as blueberries, but that 5.0 to 6.5 pH deep soil, ideally a minimum of 4 feet to an impervious layer, and a sandy loam or a sandy type of soil characteristic. They'll survive in heavier soils, but again, it's really that drainage and depth to an impermeable layer that's going to impact their growth and longevity.
Mhm. I might have just accidentally deleted someone's question. So if your question hasn't been answered, could you just pop it in there again? Anybody? Maybe not. Okay, I think we're good. And I just want to pass along Liz's comment that this was a really great presentation and we're learning a lot from it. So thank you so much, Stephen. This was wonderful.
Thanks again. Happy to engage with folks.
Great. So I guess, Peter, shall I turn it over? Yes.
Yeah, turn it over.
Turn it over. I'm turning it over to our second speaker for tonight, Andrea Farrick, and she'll tell us a little bit about her background and what she's going to talk about. And don't forget to just pop your questions in the Q&A.
Hi, friends. It's so nice to see you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. So I know a lot of you guys through PVCA. I came to Penns Valley. It'll be 9 years in October. And I was the first executive director and just love our community so much, our natural and cultural resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of dovetailing everything that Steve said and how it applies specifically to some of PVCA's strategic goals within our mission. So after I came here, I was so blown away by how much I learned from the generous knowledge and practical wisdom of the Watershed Committee, everything that has happened over the decades, the work of Lyle Sherwin and Tom Doman and George Kelly. And I'm just so grateful that they really let me in, to share everything that there is to learn. And just this past weekend, we were out cutting live steaks in Woodward, getting ready to keep doing restoration. I think, Lyle, what did we end up with? 600 some, maybe more cuttings. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how two specific strategic goals of PVCA are interconnected through this framework that Steve laid out, this sort of concept called tree crops. So Tree Crops, a Permanent Agriculture by J. Russell Smith was written 100 years ago. It was written at a time right before the Dust Bowl. He basically said, hey, we can't keep farming the way that we are. We're losing our hedgerows. We're cutting down all of these tree crops. We have this legacy of hedgerows and windbreaks and wildlife water quality habitat built into our farming systems that feed us. We have chestnuts and hazelnuts and hickories, butternuts, walnuts, pecans. And basically we sort of said, well, we have this wonderful legacy, but we want to see what straightening our waterways and tilling the earth as hard as we can and planting it can do for us. Well, pretty shortly thereafter, we had the Dust Bowl. And now we're at a very similar point in time where we have all of these very similar conditions that created the Dust Bowl, but on a global scale. And J. Russell Smith's writing is pertinent to why we should be planting our perennial crops, our trees that feed us, that feed our wildlife, that restore our waterways, provide habitat. And so many of the species that we plant for wildlife are also able to feed us. So chestnuts, animals eat and we can eat. Hazelnuts, animals eat and we can eat. and there's nut crops, there's fruit, and recently, the last year or so, I've started to connect with some people who are doing some really interesting breeding work around nut and fruit crops. And we started the Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative here in the Mid-Atlantic area that really does build upon the work that Steve Hoy and Tracy Coulter, DCNR's agroforestry coordinator, have said we need to have these processing hubs and marketing, bringing together all of our chestnuts into one place where we can put them into a water bath, where we can treat them preventatively against the weevil, or we can have these breeding programs where people are doing improved genetic selections of American hazelnuts. So basically now the Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative is available to us here in Pennsylvania, and we have an oil press where we're purchasing nuts from landowners, and then we're bringing them to our oil press in one central location in York County. And this past fall was our trial run, and we started with bitternut hickory. Now, bitternut hickory is one of the most sort of indiscreet hickory trees around there. Most people don't say, oh, look at that beautiful bitternut hickory tree. Some people might say, oh, yeah, there's like some trees, I don't know, I think they're hickories, they're in the hedgerow. But once you start to realize that they have a bright yellow bud, you start to see it across the landscape. And they have a yellow bud this time of the year. And the reason why we like them for our oil press is that the shell is so thin on them that we can press them in the oil press without having to dehull them. We don't have to shell them. And we're focused on bitternut hickory, hazelnut, and chestnut. And basically through PVCA received funding for installing multifunctional riparian forest buffers. These are riparian forest buffers that integrate the traditional goals of water quality and wildlife, and also have design aspects and socioeconomic aspects of being able to bring together fruit, nuts, and cut flower products, medicinal products that are native and grow here and grow in our riparian buffers. And although, like Steve said, chestnut trees do not do well in wet soil and riparian buffers. They want a little bit of a drier, richer, slightly acidic, deep soil. We are able to plant chestnut trees in slightly upland hedgerows within the riparian buffer mosaic of landscape restoration. So a few days ago, I went down to York County. I'm working with a breeder there who's working on some exciting nut crop for production. And I came back with this bare root hybrid chestnut tree. I have 80 chestnuts, 150 hazelnuts, 80 hickories, butternuts. And basically, this is a bare root seedling, which we plant in either the springtime or in the fall during the dormant time. It's alive. And a few things about bare root seedlings that you should know is that it's really important to keep them very wet. So right after you dig them out, or right before you're getting ready to plant them, you might want to soak them for around 6 hours or so. And then a lot of people tend to plant these bare root seedlings too deep. It's really important to identify where the root flare is, where it starts to get a little thicker, right around here. Basically find the top of where the roots are, and you want to put the top of the roots just barely below the top of the soil. Because if you're going too deep, they're not spreading out, they're not getting all the nutrients that they need. So this is a chestnut that we're planting. I'm planting a lot of chestnuts in these multifunctional riparian forest buffer projects. There's one in Woodward that I'm planting a lot of chestnuts and hazelnuts, some in Georges Valley. And basically, there's this amazing resource in Pennsylvania, in Downingtown, the J.W. Hershey Forest Farm. And right about the time when Tree Crops was written, the Forest Service sent this young man, J.W. Hershey, down to the Tennessee Valley, and he spent a decade going around collecting all of the best nuts for production, the best nuts and fruits. So this is the biggest, tastiest, uniformly ripening, easily crackable, delicious nuts. And he brought them all back to Downingtown, Pennsylvania, where he started this forest farm. And the last few years, I've been going down and collecting as many nuts and fruits as I can and bringing them back to my tree nursery in Woodward and trying to spread them across the landscape in all of these projects. So in the last 3 years, I've worked with over 50 landowners, planting over 18,000 trees, both in Penns Valley and between here and Lancaster, where my family is, in the hopes that we can all grow as many of these tree crops as we can, and not just the supply, but also the demand. So I'm doing community asset mapping and providing outlets, not just the cottage industry, the household use for these tree crops, but developing the economy. And it goes hand in hand with the conservation economy. And what's exciting in Pennsylvania right now is that we have industrial hemp and that we can integrate carbon sequestration into these systems. So basically, there's just so many opportunities for landowners around these tree crops, and we're organizing labor, we're organizing sort of pick your own style funded projects. And if people want to learn more how they can either get tree crops planted in their property or have me come out, or if you want to learn more about the Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative, please do visit our website, KeystoneTreeCropsCooperative.com. And there you'll see that its mission is to achieve right livelihood around the tree crops economy, around bioregional tree crops. So it's the nuts that I mentioned, and it's the fruit. It's the persimmons and the elderberries and the black chokeberries and the pawpaws and the American plums and the service berries. And there's so much potential for us in the face of climate resiliency to reduce soil erosion while we're working to achieve and continuing to reach forward with this great legacy that PVCA has been doing for decades.
In the chat, Josh just popped up the, say that website again, Andrea?
KeystoneTreeCrops.com.
Great, really straightforward. I have a question, Andrea, and this also would be for Stephen, maybe if you wanted to chime in. So I've just started reading about Brood X, the cicadas that are coming, and I don't know if they're going to be in our valley or not or whatever, but how does the emergence of Brood X affect tree planting this year and protecting trees this year from egg laying and all of that? Andrea, do you want to take that first?
I just hear that they're coming. I'm just waiting to experience it. I mean, as much as I do. I don't really anticipate it. One thing I've learned is, you can't really anticipate what insects are capable of. And I kind of forgot that they're coming, but they are.
They are. And I read that you should wait to plant until after they're gone. Trees,
wow.
Plant trees till after they're gone because of what they do to, yeah. So you might want to, you might want to do a little reading about that. I'm sorry to just throw that at you, but I just started reading about them this week.
Did you hear that, Steve? Are you following that? Lyle, Lyle, what are you guys doing?
Stephen, what are you guys doing over there? Chestnuts. Anything?
You know, we haven't specifically planned our planting around cicada. They do impact chestnuts, but yeah, my first thought was that's supposed to happen in 2020, not 21.
I think we should have a cook-off with cicadas, like cicada hummus, cicada pancakes.
Right.
Martha's on that, I'm sure.
Does anybody have any questions for Andrea? Let me just see what I'm reading here. Yes, Lyle can't actually say anything, but he could, Lyle, you could respond in the chat if you wanted to say anything about Brood X. Great. So if you're interested, then check out that website if you want to find out more. We cannot unmute participants. So I believe, is that correct? We cannot unmute participants?
No, we can.
We can. We
Yeah.
can,
great.
actually. Yeah.
Maybe, let me just check the Q&A here.
Yeah, I know it said that Lyle was thinking there.
Yes. Okay. So, but Andrea, perhaps, wait a second. Let me just see. No, it said there was a question, but I just don't see
Oh.
what it is.
I see it actually.
Okay.
Kat wants to would like you to tell us about the nut press and what the oils are used for.
Oh, that's a great question. So it's a Kernkraft 20, and it's a German company. And basically, for $8,000, you have an oil press. We started with the hickory oil, the bitternut hickory. It's a high heat cooking oil. You can use it for anything that you would, there's so many applications. You can eat it. You can, use it as a stain. You can use it like in biofuel, but it's so delicious. It basically, we took approximately $500 investment into purchasing 100 pounds of bitternut hickory oil, and it produced about $4,000 worth of high heat cooking oil. The economics are really in line, but the byproduct of making the oil gives you seed cake or feed cake, which is animal feed, or in the case of the bitternut hickory, all the tannins go into the seed cake. But with hazelnut, you get hazelnut oil, and then you get the seed cake that's delicious, like Nutella kind of additive. Does that answer your question, Kat? It's interesting. It's also the same processing equipment that we're using for processing hemp oil and flour, and also sunflower and canola. So, it's part of this mosaic of locally grown oil crops. You can also, a lot of the genetics around the breeding with nuts is around the crackability. When you crack a shagbark hickory or a shellbark hickory nut and you open it, is it in a whole piece? Is it easy to take out? So that's some of the genetics as well. There he is. There's Lyle.
Yeah, I was just
Hi,
gonna.
Lyle.
Mute.
There you go. Now we hear you.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Thanks a lot. On the cicadas, yeah, I listened to Doug Talamy's program about the Audubon had. He's the entomologist at Delaware that and ecologist. And the question came up, what about the cicadas? And he promotes native plantings very vigorously and effectively. And he said, don't plant this spring. I offered a suggestion that, the cicada life cycle goes in May and into early June. If you get good container grown seedlings, you can keep watering them and plant them at the end of the cicada cycle in middle of June and still have hopefully enough of the growth year to get a seedling established. But I think with some special care, that's what it's going to take. His advice was they don't affect herbaceous plantings, just trees and shrubs. So his advice, though, was think hard about whether you're going to plant this spring, and if possible, hold it off until later. The other thing is find out if where I live, I didn't live there in, what was it, 2003. So I'm trying to find out from neighbors whether there was a cicada eruption at my place. It might be possible to find that out and check out your planting site. Does it have a history of the cicada eruption? It's something to see in its own right. The other thing I'm thinking about is I think you could put a seedling in a 2-foot plastic shelter. I'm not an advocate of plastic shelters by any means, and put the bird net on top and seat the shelter deeply in the soil. And that may exclude the cicadas. They may eat the plastic in the bird net, and but I'm going to try doing that. But it's last year was a terrible planting year with 2 late freezes in May, and then we had a drought, and then we had stuff going on in the fall. I was hoping 2021 was going to be better, but keep our fingers crossed. Thanks.
Thank you, Lyle.
Oh, okay.
All right, and I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, but yeah, I'll just say what Mike just said in the chat here, and Stephen and Andrea, thank you, and a round of applause, everyone, for our presenters this evening. That was really great, and thank you so much, Annie, for doing the Q&A and helping us out. You're such a great volunteer. It means a lot to PVCA. So I'm gonna wrap us up here. I want to thank, of course, the presenters again. Thank our volunteers. I want to welcome Mike one more time as our new executive director. I'm sure that you're all going to really enjoy meeting him and help him get his feet so that he helps our feet be firmer, so that we can walk farther and maybe even a little faster. Thank you for your membership in PVCA. Make sure to renew and maybe get someone new to come and join us. Of course, join us at our events that are coming up. So we have the Spring Bank Cleanup that Annie mentioned earlier, and we're going to have an Eventbrite for you to sign up for, and that'll be in shifts, as she said, so that we can be as safe as we can during what we hope we're seeing some waning days of the pandemic, but don't take anything for granted, please. Stay safe, stay healthy. Core Center Gives is on May 11th and 12th. So tune in from 5 to 6 on the 11th and do a donation then. Hopefully we can get one of those matching prizes and raise as much money as we can. We've done really well in Center Gives, and let's make sure that we do that even more. Thank you to the board. Thank you all for being members in a really great organization. Let's have a really fantastic 2021. You guys have a great night. Thank you.
Good night.